much for staying after for this. I'm going to be covering a lot of content today. So imagine about $5,000 worth of tuition in 2 hours. At USC tuition is very expensive, so imagine that you're getting a good education today. 주로 한국 분이시군요. Okay. 영어로. I think I'm going to favor English. 영어로 주로 하다가 제일 중요한 것만 한국말로 번역하겠습니다. 왜냐하면 equal translation 하기는 좀 너무 오래되고 힘드니까. 네. 자, 그러면 목사님 저거 어떻게 advancing 하죠? 네. 아, 이걸로 해요. 아, 네네, 알겠습니다. I didn't know that. Okay, I'm going to do this. 오늘 저기 3 area를 제가 cover할 거예요. 근데 I'm going to be covering 3 content areas, and they're all related to kind of immigration. But the last part's going to be kind of basic communication skills. But I feel like what I'm going to cover today, 나이 많으신 할머니 할아버지부터서 어르신 그다음에 current parents, the content, whether you're Korean or not, I feel that this content will have relevance for you in many ways. Because it's all focused on understanding. 그러니까 뭐를 이해하냐면 우리의 경험. 근데 우리의 경험을 정리하는 거예요. So at USC I teach a class called Asian American Psychology. 그런 수업이 있어요. 모든 큰 대학은 다 그런 수업이 있어요. Asian American Psychology. And 주로 누가 그 수업을 하냐면 그 아시아인 아이들이에요. 1.5세, 2세들, 3세들까지인데 So this class that I teach called Asian American Psychology is normally attended by Asian American students, not all, but mostly. And you might think, why do Asian American students take a class on Asian American Psychology when it's about their experience? 자기 경험에 대해서인데 왜 그런 수업을 해야지 혜택을 받을 수 있나 이렇게 생각을 할 수 있는데 제일 혜택을 많이 받는 학생들이 Asian American이에요. In fact, it's the Asian American students who receive the most out of those classes. Why do you think so? 왜 그럴까요? 자기 경험에 대해서 한 건데 벌써 다 알지 않아요? Don't they already know? So what it is, 우리가 경험한다고 다 이해하는 게 아니에요. Just because we experience something doesn't necessarily mean we understand it. And so why Asian American students really get a lot is that there's theory, there's research, and there's understanding that helps them make sense out of their experience. 우리가 경험한 거를 그걸 이해를 하고 분석을 하고 그것을 이것이 이렇게 해서 우리가 이런 역할을 했구나. That understanding is key. So today 오늘의 그 제일 중요한 것은 understanding, deeper understanding of how immigration, 이민 자체가 how immigration itself really impacts so many of us. Whether you're Asian or not, there's a lot of commonality to that immigrant experience, right? So, 제일 첫 에리아는 뭐냐면 부모님이 어떻게 아이들을 양육하는가, parenting style에 대해서 아주 중요한 there's a lot of research on this. So I'm going to talk about different parenting style and how that is intersecting with immigration and how that affects our generation and the next generation, right? Then I'm going to talk about cultural identity. 그러니까 여기서 자라난 젊은이들이 어떤 여러 가지 심리적인 conflict, 갈등, 네네. 왜냐면 소수 민족이니까. Why is this a salient issue? Is because we're minorities, and for Asian Americans, we look different. 다른 인종이니까 또 거기에서 여러 가지 자녀들이 표현할 수 없는 여러 가지, 특별히 텍사스 이런 데서 캘리포니아하고 조금 다르죠. 그런 여러 가지 겪으면 돼서 그거 아이들이 어떻게 how do immigrant children process and deal with cultural identity and cultural conflict. So there's a lot of research around that. And then at the end, hopefully, I have time to be able to some basic relationship skills to help all relationships. All right, so there's 3 parts. I'm going to divide it up, and we'll have a little break in between each part. So it's going to be a little bit long. Okay. 자, 그러면 let's think about immigration. 이민 자체부터서 우리가 조금 더 분석해야 되는데 why immigrate? 왜 사람들이 이민해요? It's one of those, we know, but we have to start with there. Why would anyone leave their family, their culture, their country of origin, go to another country to decide there? Why? Better life. Yes. 근데 if we break that down further, sociologists of immigration, because U.S. is all about immigration. We are a nation of immigrants. So we've 분석했어요. So what is it about better life? 2 things. Okay? One is where we live isn't so great. Right? 우리 사는 데가 우리가 앞길을 보니까 그런 기회와 희망이 not as much. Right? So that's what's called push factors in immigration. What are some of the push factors? Not only our experience, but across immigration. What motivates people to leave their country of origin? 자기 나라를 벗어나게 밀어내는 그런 push factor들이 뭐입니까? 그 물론 economic opportunity가 limited 된 거고, 그거는 pull factor이에요. So that's the other side. First, what's pushing people out? Persecution, religious persecution, 뭐 전쟁, right? Or political instability. 여러 가지 역사적으로 보면 많아요. But it's a combination of what we call push factors, motivating people to leave, and then 우리가 떠난다고 해가지고 아무데나 가는 게 아니에요. Just because we leave doesn't mean we can go anywhere. Then there are certain pull factors that draw us to certain places, like the American dream, open immigration policy, right? So just kind of a basic understanding that immigration, 왜 사람들이 이민을 하냐? 사실은 if you think about it, many of us have experienced, it's one of the most difficult experiences. 안 그래요? Those who have experienced the leaving and coming and settling, I don't know, are you also an immigrant? Yeah, childhood. Okay, is anyone here not an immigrant? Okay, you have the couple of people here. But since you're attending an immigrant church, it'll be very helpful to understand the context, right? But at some point, your ancestors were also immigrants. Do you know how many generations back?
I'm 4th generation, so 3 back.
Okay.
My great-grandparents.
Okay.
I'm 5 on the same.
Okay. Yeah, but unless you're Native American, we all immigrated at some point, and at some point those ancestors experienced the same kind of immigration struggles, right? So, but for Koreans in particular, education is a key factor. Yeah, Koreans highly value education. Now, Korea has a good education system, but then why do Koreans come here? Better education and extreme competition이에요, right? We have to understand that I don't think I need echo. So Korea, the extreme competition is very, very difficult. And we are very elitist. What that means is, imagine everybody in the US having to feel like they have to get into Harvard, Princeton, and Yale. 그렇죠? 한국에서는 너무 엘리트 그게 강해가지고 그러니까 it's very difficult. And so that's one of the reasons why, right? So, but here's the thing. Immigrants come, 여기 오는데 꿈은 많아요. Lots of dreams and hopes for a better life, especially the parents' generation. But I would say there's a hidden, 자기들이 생각 못한 것들을 겪게 돼요. What are the hidden aspects of immigration that parent immigrating generation didn't quite think through? Culture shock? 네. of But I would say that identity crisis not so much for the adult generation, right? Because they come, they know they're Korean. 그러니까 어르신들은 벌써 한국인이라고 알기 때문에 여기 어렵긴 해도 they don't struggle with the identity. It's the next generation. But see, this is where, and here's the thing, immigration usually the first generation 1세들은 희생하는 거예요. 안 그래요? So many things 포기하고 they give up and they basically sacrifice themselves for the next generation, right? 그런데 what is the first generation's idea of what this life and their family is going to be like? What is the model that the first generation has of family? It's a Korean version, right? So 몸은 physically they're here and they're taking advantage of 미국에서 사는 여러 가지 꿈과 혜택은 다 하는데 생각을 못하고 계산을 잘 안 하고 오신 것은 모르니까 얼마나 이 가족을 위해서 희생을 했는데 they sacrifice for the family, but what they don't quite anticipate is how much the family is going to differ from what they imagine and anticipated. That is what I call the hidden cost of migration. 그러니까 부모님들의 mentality is Korean family. The kids, somewhat, but they have a very different kind of mentality. 그래서 the first generation immigrate for the sake of the children, but 아이들부터서 어디 가요? 있는 거예요. They lose their kids. Why? Naturally, in immigration, that happens very naturally. What's the first reason why? What's part of assimilation? What happens when kids come early? Language. 그거부터서 문제가 되는 거예요. 언어부터서 안 그래요? So the parents hold on to their language. It's a hard time for them to speak English. The kids very quickly lose Korean, whatever they had, and then they pretty much start speaking English. That's the first major divide. And that just grows and grows and grows until you have families living together, but they're not really able to communicate. So this is just one example of how immigration is a paradox. 부모님들은 가족과 자녀들을 위해서 이민을 와서 희생을 했는데 자녀들 자체부터서 있는 거예요. The parents come here, sacrifice for the future of the family and for their children, but the first things they lose are their kids to America, right? Value differences, cultural differences, and all sorts of things. So parenting style. So the other thing that happens is parents come, and then what kind of parenting do they do? What's their model again? Korean style. Where's the problem? Well, Korean style parenting works where? In Korea. But Korean style parenting doesn't quite work in the US. Okay? Not because it's good or bad, just because it's different. Environment is different, the kids' expectations are different, kids' view of the parents, what's normal, it's not all different. Challenges are different. Parents don't know. 부모님들은 여기서 키우는 아이들은 아이들을 제대로 못해요. 왜 그래요? Not because you're bad parents. 나쁜 부모님들이라서 그런 게 아니라 단지 simply for the matter of the fact that these parents don't know American society. They grew up in Korea. They know how to navigate and maybe they know how to guide their children in Korea, but they don't really know what high school culture. They think they know, but they don't really know. 진짜 아이들이 어떤 생활하는 걸 잘 모르잖아요, 사실은요. 거기서부터서 이제 문제가 되는 거예요. 자, 그러면 부모님들은 how do parents parent? 자, 이렇게 한번 생각. Now I'm going to ask the younger generation. I wish I had more younger kids. They would really like this. You know why? They can use this as a weapon against their parents. 그래서 아이들 다 오라고 그래요. 자기들 도움 될 거라고. 난 장난이지만. So 미국 아이들이 Korean American immigrant kids, one of the things that they say, when you grow up in a family, 모든 가족이 자기 가족인 것 같이 처음에는 생각해요. That's very natural. You just think, oh, everyone's family is like our family because you only know your family. But when they start to visit other families, then they start to notice, oh, not all, 다 다른 가족들이 다 우리 같이 하지가 않는다. 특별히 부모님들이 어떻게 부모 노력하는가를 they pay a lot of attention. So what are the things that kids notice the most? 부모님들이 어떤 차이점이 있는가 아이들이 민감해요. Discipline. Yes. Some parents are very strict and some parents are very permissive and loose. That's kids are very attuned to that, right? What else? Especially Korean American either or immigrants. Okay, so customs and traditions and things like that. True? Yeah? What else? 뭐 생활하는 방식, 특별히 문화 차이가 있으면 그럴 수 있죠. 또 뭐요? Expectations, yes, around more child, household things. But one of the things that Asian American kids always talk about is how affectionate non-Korean parents are. Especially, 이 generation, younger 모르지만 1세들 있잖아요, 어르신들. In Korean culture, they don't really hug, they don't really say, I love you. The expression of emotions and affection is not something very common in kind of East Asian Korean culture. So that's one of the things that the kids really notice growing up here is how they go to their American, white friend's house and the mom's all hugging and interacting and they're very casual and then they come and the dad's, So those are the two things that children really notice about how parents differ in the way that they parent. So there's a theory. 스탠퍼드에 있는 다이애나 범랜드라는 분이 이 theory를 만들었어요. Parenting style. 어떻게 부모님들이 how do parents differ in their parenting approach? But it's based on two underlying dimensions. First one, 이 dimension은 뭐냐면 얼마나 strict. 하나 strict하지 않나. 엄격한 여기 높으면 많이 엄격하고 아주 엄격하지 않는 자유주의로 하는 거. That's the vertical dimension. 그 다음에는 이 dimension은 뭐냐면 얼마나 따뜻하게 정을 보여주나. How warm and expression of emotions. That's the horizontal dimension. So 이 두 칸을 이렇게 cross하면 we get 4 different quadrants or types. All right? And these are the names. One is called, up here is authoritative. That's the ideal kind of parenting. Why? High expectation. 기대가 높아야 돼. 부모님이 기대 없으면 누가 기대 있겠어요? 네? 기대는 많은데 기대만 가지고는 아니고 support를 많이 해주는 거예요. So authoritative parenting up here is the ideal type of parenting with high expectations, but with a lot of support. What's different over here? 여기 있는 부모님들, they have high expectations, but no warmth, no support. 하려고 하고 기대만 잔뜩 하지 아이들이 따뜻하게 이렇게 보충을 안 해줘요. Right? Then on the bottom are two different types of permissive, 너무 자유를 주는 부모님들. What's the difference between the two different types of permissive parents? Because that's very important. 이쪽에는 the permissive indulgent, parents let the kids do whatever they want, but it's also with a lot of warmth and support. I call it grandparent parenting. 할머니, 할아버지 parent가 부모님 하는 그런 역할. 여기는 뭐예요? What's different here? Parents let the kids do whatever they want out of neglect. Okay, it's like they either don't have time or energy or care, so it's like do whatever you want. Very different kind of permissive. So 아주 간단하게 좀 분석을 다 하면 이 authoritarian parent가 let's say the best example, the authoritarian parent, if a kid says something and then and the parent says do something and the eye says why? 왜 그래야 되면? 그러면 부모님의 대답은 뭐예요? As an authoritarian parent, when a kid challenges a parent and says, why? What is that parent's answer? Because I said so. Exactly. Because the parent's authority is enough, right? No explanation else is needed, right? But here's the thing. Authoritarian is often highly critical. 기대가 너무 크고 조금이라도 실망하면 they're very harsh oftentimes. Not only high expectations, but it's often critical and very punitive if the child does not live up to the parent's expectations, right? So that's the common, not a lot of expression of warmth. Does that sound like a typical Korean father? So there's a cultural factor here. So we need to understand that in East Asian Confucian-based culture, this is the normal, ideal father figure. Right? Someone who's very austere. 이런 말이 있잖아요. 속담은 자식하고 마누라는 칭찬 안 한다는 그런 속담이 있지 않아요? Yeah, it says only a fool compliments his wife and his child, kind of thing. But here's the thing. In immigration, the immigration 때문에 더 여기에 보태되는 게 있어요. There are other factors related to immigration that adds to this. 저기 죄송하지만 목사님 에어컨 조금만 왜냐하면 저도 좀 더운 것 같고 점심 많이 먹고 잠이 올 것 같아서 조금만 시원하게 해주세요. 네, thank you. I asked them to turn down the heat, temperature a little bit. So, 근데 여기 와서 이민 온 부모님들은 또 거기에 좀 보태서 이유가 뭐냐면 I sacrificed so much, and so you owe me. That's perfectly understandable, right? Because parents did sacrifice a lot. Do you know why 여러분 부모님들 왜 우리 generation은 다 거의 다 성공하신 줄 아세요? 감사합니다. Do you know why? 우리 부모님 저한테 공부하라고 말해본 적이 없어요. Actually, a lot of us who came early on in immigration, we've all become fairly successful generation. It's not just Korean. The first generation often end up becoming very successful and very driven. Second generation, not so much. Why do you think our 1.5 first generation children are oftentimes very driven and accomplish a lot? Of it, what do you mean by it?
You see the struggles.
Yes.
So you see the differences.
Yes.
You see that perhaps like their English or their culture shock is not the same.
Mm-hmm.
So you understand it more directly
Mm-hmm.
versus second, third generation.
They don't see it.
Hey,
Yeah.
You didn't adapt to it. Let's move on.
Yeah.
So
That's right. 우리 generation 1.5세, 저는 1.5세잖아요. We see our parents struggle. So our parents never had to do it. We just felt internally motivated to help them, but also realize if we don't do it, we're not going to make it in this society as well. 그래서 한국인만 아니라 European even with European immigration, 언제나 first generation, young first 1.5 generation이 제일 accomplished를 많이 해요. 그런데 2세, but by second and third generation, 다 average American이 돼요. And that's what we're looking at with Asian migration as well. Second and third generation, we become kind of average in terms of, we lose that exceptional kind of motivation. Generally speaking, I'm talking about, okay? So there's this but immigrant parents sometimes become more strict. Okay, even though it's culturally accepted, that's one factor, become even more strict because they're compensating for loss. 그 부모님도 한국에서는 그래도 하다 여기 오니까 힘든 일 하시잖아요. They work in very kind of sometimes difficult menial jobs, and so, they're putting all that kind of met expectation into their children. So that's part of the factor. But here's the thing. There's not only Korean but Chinese. This is all the search. So if you can do this, Google, why do Asian parents 시작하면 제일 흔하게 나오는 This is really funny. You actually have to. The most common searches, why don't parents, Asian parents never apologize? 왜 아시안 부모님 절대 사과를 안 하냐? 왜 이렇게 소리를 많이 지르나? 왜 의사를 다 되라고 하냐? 왜 그렇게 기대가 높으냐? 왜 사랑한다는 말을 안 하냐? 예? 그리고 성적을 그렇게 생각하냐? It's really funny. Not only that, these are, you have to see some of these. Now it's common, but there's YouTube parodies. And I like the one on the bottom. I encourage you to see it. It's the original YouTube parody of this boy named Eric Liang, and he's imitating his Chinese mother. Okay? And it is hilarious. It is hilarious. I showed this to my students in a cultural class talking about Asian families, and after my white students saw it, they were shocked. They didn't think it's funny. They thought, oh my goodness. So there's such a cultural difference. 백인들이 이해를 잘 못하더라고요. 그러면서 왜 동양 부모님들 그렇게 mean하고 그렇게 harsh하냐고 그렇게만 생각하고 우리는 무서워서 했는데 진짜 that really shows some of that cultural difference in terms of parents, right? But these are just some funny things. So look up The Crazy Asian Mom by Eric Liang. You'll love it. Yeah. But here's the problem. Authoritarian이 너무 extreme. 어느 정도는 some degree of authoritarian parenting we can understand. And the kids, immigrant kids know that's just cultural. But if it's extreme, 너무나 그 부모님들이 심하게 그러시면 그만큼 there's an extreme reaction. 그게 뭐냐 하면 너무나 부모 밑에서 when they're too overly controlled by kids in junior high and high school, and then they go off to college, what happens to them oftentimes? If they were raised too strict, what happens to those kids sometimes? You know, 부모님, parents are trying to keep you on the narrow and straight. It's like the Disneyland, Autoland. You go into the ditch, you go into you go off-roading is what I call it. Yes. Because too strict parents, it's like a Disneyland auto, you can't go too far. And you don't even know how to drive. Because you've never had to develop, you never had the chance to develop the skills or the boundaries. So I saw this a lot. I see this a lot among Asian American who raised very strict, very sheltered, very protected. But think about this. It's like parents who put a cast on their children. But overprotective, authoritarian parents, what do? They have a cast. When should we put a cast on a child? When they're injured. 왜 아이들이 이게 손 부러지면 이거 캐스트 하잖아요. 그런데 너무나도 컨트롤링하고 익스트림하면 아이들한테 언제나 캐스트를 있는 거예요. But 문제가 이해되세요? 캐스트는 뭐가 고장났을 때, 부러졌을 때 보호하기 위해서 캐스트를 하는데 the idea of cast is at a time to help heal something, but overly controlling parents, they think a kid should be in a cast all the time. I think our Adventist immigrant parents, not just Korean, Latin parents, some black parents, I mean, most other than white parents, sometimes think in this way. And they try to do this for spiritual reasons as well as for other reasons. But extreme version is not healthy at all. It is not healthy at all, right? Okay, so then let's talk about permissive parenting. I already talked about why they're not good. But why is it? So in some ways, 이 자유주의 너무 부모님들은 우리 한국 문화하고 좀 맞지가 않잖아요. So permissive parenting is really not culturally compatible with traditional Korean and Asian parenting. But many immigrant parents become permissive parents. 왜 그럴까요? 문화적으로는 안 맞는데 결과적으로 보면 그런 부모님들이 많았어요. 특별히 early immigration, 이민 초기에. 어떻게, why and how did they become permissive parents? When culturally it's not very consistent. 왜 그렇게 됐을까요? 어떻게? Okay. In some ways, because they don't really know, it's like let them have the freedom. They also don't know how to appropriately regulate. They don't know high school culture. They don't really know what's appropriate. 그래서 they kind of overly trust their kids because they have to. So in some ways. 근데 that's the reality, actually. Early immigration, they're so busy. I don't know about you, but my parents worked 2 different jobs. They were so busy just creating a financial stability that we all grew up by ourselves. Most immigrant kids were latchkey kids. Most parents, immigrant parents, by today's standards, would have been reported to Child Protective Services for child neglect. 안 그래요? 아이들을 혼자 놔두고 요즘 시기에서는 그거를 이해도 허락이 안 되죠. But that was the reality, right? Because it was very difficult kind of time. Right? So here's how immigration affects parenting in terms of being more strict in some ways, and then also more permissive. But it's also kind of interesting how the two combine, right? 두 개 다 opposite인데 똑같은 부모에 같이 있어요. What we often see in immigrant parents is these 2 opposing parenting style in the same parents. 안 그래요? Many times. 자, in what way are they super strict? 어느 분야? It's about where they are so strict. What's the one thing that Asian parents know? 확실하게 아는 거 뭐예요? 공부. Studying. What they actually know is grades. Do you see now why they overly focus on grades? Okay. So, and it's Korean culture. Koreans really value education. And they also, 한국 분들은 왜 교육받은 사람은 어떤 그런 expectation 있잖아요. 그러니까 in Korea, if you were a smart kid and you had good grades, you did stay out of trouble because you had no time to get into trouble, right? So Korean parents come to the U.S. with that same mentality, and they figure, hey, if my kids are smart and they're doing well in school, then 뭐예요? 그 다음에는 믿음이 그냥 놓이지는. 그러면 착한 아이들이야. 안 그래요? 근데 미국에는 그렇지가 않거든요. That's not the reality. In America, you can be smart and be into all sorts of troubles. But they don't know that. So immigrant Korean parents and Asian parents overly focus on grades. That's also the reason why they immigrated, right? So all these layers. But then they overly neglect the social and emotional. And they figure, they're figuring it out. Right? So that's how you get this conflicting, overly authoritarian in one domain and overly permissive in another. Right? 자, 그러면 제일 확실한 부모님은 authoritative. 네? 권위를 가지면서 권위를 abuse 안 하는 거. They have and hold on to their authority, but they don't abuse their authority. And that is absolutely critical. Right? Because if we look at both authoritarian, in the Bible, who does authoritarian parent remind you of? There's one character in the Bible that is a perfect example of authoritarian parent. Anyone come to mind? I think you're thinking about the permissive one. So, permissive. Yes, well, we'll go there. 성경에서 permissive한 부모의 제일 이미지가 누구죠? 엘리야잖아요. 엘리야. Yeah, Eli. Right? And God says, why do you put your children above me? So here's the interesting thing. My generation and above who grew up with very strict, 엄격하게 이렇게 자라난 저희 나이 또래 애들이 완전 반대를 가가지고 they become very permissive. Do you know that? 여러분 자녀들 그렇게 보이세요 혹시? 자녀들 무오직은 it's whatever they want, whenever they want. In many ways, they've kind of idolized their children. In many ways, it's an overreaction against the super strict authoritarian parenting. So they say, I'm going to raise my children differently. 그래서 immigration 이 generation을 보면 여기서 경험한 것을 이쪽 extreme으로 하는 거 많은 것 같아요. So you see all that kind of transition there. The example of authoritarian parent to me is King Saul. So remember when Saul makes a very rash statement. He says, nobody is going to eat. But for whom did he make this overly, right when the soldiers needed to eat, to fight this battle, 왜 그렇게 큰, for whom did he make that rash proclamation? For himself. It's all about his ego, right? And even when the very end, remember, they cast the lots, and it was discovered that Jonathan, his own son, who didn't know, and when he heard about it, what did he say? 우리 아버지가 어리석어, he did something foolish, right? Because it was. And he knew he did it for his own ego. 근데 그 사울 왕 아버지가 제일 마지막에 가서, remember what he did? In order to maintain his own 자존심을 지키기 위해서 자기 아들까지 희생하려고 했어요. He was willing to sacrifice his own son to maintain his face and his honor. But everybody knew, right? That's the thing. 어리석은 것은 다 알아요. 본인만 모르지. Right? That's the key trait in authoritarian parenting ultimately, and permissive. So if we look at it from a biblical perspective, 성경 보는 데서 관점으로 보면 사회에서 말하는 것을 성경적으로 보면 두 부모님, the authoritarian and permissive, it's really about not the child. It's not really what is best for the child, but it is best for whom? For themselves. And parents, repent 하셔도 그거는 인정을 하셔야 됩니다. 왜 그러냐면 물론 여러분은 모르고, and I'm now speaking to the older generation because I go to many churches and I see and meet my generation and below who have really been hurt by this. And what they're still waiting for is that parental apology. They really are. 그래서 부모님 물론 모르고 그러셨고 환경도 여러 가지 이해는 할 수 있지만 한 번은 꼭 자녀들한테 진심으로 미안하다고 꼭 한 번은 하세요. 아무리 커서 no matter how old they are, 아무리 뭐 그렇게 하다 해도 그 깊은 상처들이 아직 있어요. 그러니까 자녀들한테 뭐 저같이 60살이든지 아직 17살, 19살이든지 진정으로 한 번은 꼭 미안하다고 그러세요. That's very important part of healing and of restoration. Yeah. Thank you. I would really hope that you do that. 금년에 Academy Award 상탄 movie 아세요? Everyone know the movie that won the Academy Awards this year? 좀 이상한 영화예요. Everything, Everywhere, All at Once라는데 안 보셔도 되는데 what's notable about it is Asian American, right? But what is at the core of that movie? What's the core theme? That's right. 제일 거기에 핵심이 뭐냐면 엄마와 딸 관계의 갈등과 아픔을 해소, processing하는 무비예요. So I realized, given my research and my work, that's the ultimate apology movie. 그래서 이 generation이 그렇게 그런 영화를 좋아하는 거예요. 왜 그러냐면 부모한테서 그런 뭐 꼭 사과를 받는. It's not just about receiving the apology, but the apology is necessary for healing and restoration, right? And too much of Asian culture, 아시아 문화가 부모님한테 너무나 권리를 줘요. It gives too much authority to parents, and it's too easy for parents to abuse that authority. And so that's where I really want to challenge first generation. But my generation, I want to challenge you differently. You've given away too much of your authority. I wish there was more of you. Every church I go, I think, wow, these children are running around in a way that is really not supporting worship. It's one thing to love children, but a child's behavior should never be allowed to be disruptive and harmful to that context. And I feel our generation, 우리 generation 부모님들은 너무나 아이들한테 우상을 만들었어요. 그래서 too child-centered. And I don't think those kids are happy. 왜 그러냐면 what's very interesting about the permissive kids, 행복할 것 같죠. 자기 마음대로. You would think they'd be happy because they get to do whatever they want. But actually, these are the most unhappy kids. 왜 그럴까요? Why do you think they are the most unhappy kids when they get to do whatever they want? Children crave structure. They need to know what the boundaries are. That's how we feel security. 어린 갓난아이들, you know, infants, when you put them in the middle of a crib, right, when they're young, what happens to them? You think right in the middle they have all the space. 근데 갓난아이들 침대, crib의 중간에 넣으면 어떻게 해요? Well, before they can get out. They always rotate until they reach a barrier, because that's where they feel the safest. Boundaries are there for security, right? Not just as punishment. So actually, permissive kids are very unhappy. They're actually always pushing boundary because why? They want someone to push back so that they will feel more secure and more loved. Even though it may not seem like it, they will test you. But in reality, they're actually asking for 엄마 아빠 to be 엄마 아빠, to really maintain that kind of boundary, right? So, authoritative parenting is really who God is. High expectations and standards, but with warmth and support. Do you know theologically the best example of authoritative parenting in God? Justification with sanctification. Think about that. It is so, so true, right? God has high expectations. Just because he loves us and died for us doesn't mean, oh, you can do whatever you want. Once saved, always, no. Theologically, all the others, no. Because he loves us so much, he has that high expectation. And he says, you can do it. I will help you every step of the way. Whereas authoritarian parent, do it on your own. And it's the law. And it's judgment. You do it, you don't do it, punishment. That's the authoritarian parent. But authoritative parent is justification with sanctification. High expectations, but with warmth and support. 자, 여러분 차례예요. So that's module 1. Okay? What are some of your thoughts? Yes.
I'm from Brazil, and my friend just left Mexican, right, background. And I know your main focus is Asian, but we can relate a lot.
Absolutely.
What you're saying, and I'm like, I immigrated here by myself,
Mm.
but I see so many connections.
Yeah.
With, you know, the way that I was raised that way. Just different nuances, like you guys, like value a lot the education. My mom was like religion, very strong on that way.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I appreciate it.
Yeah, that's why it just cuts across most non-Western immigration cultures. Yes. Wilson, yes, go ahead.
I think with me it was like I'm Latino too, so they have that strict fathers and very. But I don't know. In my case, I think I was very blessed that I grew up in a good home. I could absolutely say that I was happy as a child, and it perfectly exampled the things that. How my dad was very authoritative. He was not authoritarian. He would let us know, don't do that because that's bad for you.
Yes.
Or do this because it was always letting us know to do something because it would affect us, and we listened to it, and then we seen the effects of
And
it.
that's a key part of authoritative. 얼마나 설명을 하는데 설명의 이유를 대는 거예요. 그것도 나에 맞춰서. So that's a key part, what he just described as a key part of authoritative parenting. It isn't just because I said so,
Yeah.
but here's the reason why.
Yeah, there's action, there's consequences.
Yes.
So that's me seeing that now. It's like, okay, so I could see how it was raised. Then it went to where, as I got older, I didn't have much supervision, so it became like in a different. I didn't indulge in when I wanted because they were not there. So, but it was just different. But how in my beginning years, my childhood, they taught me right.
Yeah. 왜냐하면 그 규칙을 가르치면 부모가 없어도, you know, if you teach kids principle, then even when the parents are there with the authority, they will continue. So that's where Proverbs train your children. 자녀들을 훈련을 시키라고 했어요. Train up a child in the way that he should go, and he will continue in that path. So the perfect model for parenting is training. We're going to have training happen. So what other happens is especially gardening. And when you're raising kids, it's kind of like parents, the traditional Asian is, I want you to be what I want you to be. And even if you're not an avocado tree, you must be an avocado tree because avocados are very expensive and is most valuable, right? So they take an orange tree and try to turn it into an avocado tree, right? But what we really should be doing is being students of our children in a wise way to see, okay, if my husband and I are orange and lemon, then I know our children aren't going to be like an apple tree, right? But still, as the tree develops, I'm going to look to see what kind of a tree are you. I'm going to look to see what's your particular strengths. Exactly. You could be a beautiful grapefruit, right? Or a lime, right? And maybe sometimes, you know, something very random shows up, right? Maybe it's from the grandparents or something, right? But the idea is you water, different trees need different kind of support. Some trees need trimming, and some trees need a lot of water. Some trees, so we need to become students of our children, to watch them as they grow, so we can support and nurture and train them to be the best kind of tree. Because who's the ultimate gardener? God. Our children are not our possessions. And again, Asian culture, we are taught to see our children as 우리의 소주품이라 그래요? 소주품? 소유예요. As our own. That's very much built into the Confucian model of family, is that children are an extension of the parents, and that the children are the property of the parents to do as they wish. Right? For not only the parents, but of course for the ancestors. They say it that way, but it's really ultimately for a lot of it is parental ego.
I
Yes?
don't know if you're going to discuss this later,
Mhm.
but like how can we as adults facilitate this relationship? Because even when you become an adult, your parents still want to have that type of relationship with you, like treating you still like you're a child. And then there's a verse in the Bible that says that we have to respect and honor our parents. So sometimes it's just so hard to find a balance, like what place I'm not honoring them, what place I'm honoring them. Like how can I find a balance where like I want to live my life the way I see fit, and I want to, you know, disconnect from this chains, you know, of controlling. But how can I honor them and don't disrespect them? Like where is the line, you know?
That's a very tough. 그러니까 부모님들 차이점 있을 때 어떻게 부모님들 챌린지를 적당히 하면서 그래도 존경하는가, 그것을 물어보는데, I also want to hear a comment, a question.
So, us as son or daughters, we know that sometimes the relationship with our parents is not the best. And sometimes in a school or a church, we have access to this kind of information. And of course, it's not only our responsibility to deal with it by ourselves, but when we try to communicate that to our parents and we open ourselves and we are like, okay, I feel this way, and I feel bad because I feel maybe that you are rejecting me or minimizing what I do, they, instead of be like, oh yes, I understand, they are like, well, but you're still bad. And they, instead of using the opportunity or what we want to do is like open ourselves and show them what we feel, they, instead of actually like supporting, they are like more still against and against and against, and they use it against you to judge you more instead of actually being like open. Does that make sense?
Yes. So let me hold on to those questions because your comment I will touch on at the end as to there are workable parents, well, there any place. There are workable people and there are folks who are not workable. So you kind of have to decide. But the short version is, and 그 부모님들을 어떻게 이렇게 challenge 하는가, let me tell you an inside secret. There's a Korean saying, 한국에 이런 속담이 있죠. No parent can win over their children. Right? What is 한국말은 뭐세요? 자식을 이기는 부모가 없다. Yeah. There's a saying, there's no parent that can win over a child. Now, from a child's point of view, that seems like, really? I feel so like there's so much in power. But guess what? I have seen, whether in marriage conflict or in other areas where very, very strong personalities, you think they will never change or they will never get it. The only people who have been teach those people lessons, guess who? Their children. So even though your parents may be very authoritarian, it's still, there's the parental care and love, hopefully, I'm not saying all do, okay, that they respond to it. And so be patient, try to educate them, and really pray for wisdom and discernment, because I really, really claim James 1:5. That in those times of difficulty when I'm just dealing with, and I'm just praying for wisdom and insight to know how to act in that moment, and God surely answers those prayers. So that James 1:5 is my go-to for everything, especially in dealing with parents. Yeah. Yes?
이제 저 같은 경우엔 이제 티네이저가 되는 자녀가 있다 보니까
네.
티네이저를 키워보는 경험이 제가 없었으니까 저도 굉장히 고집세고 제 주장이 강한 사람이고
네.
제 와이프도 그런 편이고, 근데 저희가 이제 이야기할 때 저는 아이들한테 초등학생 때는 설명해주고 우리가 선택도 좀 해주는 편이고, 중학생이 된 이제 티네이저가 된 다음엔 설명은 해주고 어떤 게 좋을까 플러스 컨스 얘기해주고 선택은 네가 하라고 하는 편이거든요. 그리고 책임도 지라고. 근데 이제 저희 와이프는 아직도 어린 것 같다고 얘기할 때가 많아서, 그래서 이제 물론 저랑 와이프랑 결정을 내려야 되는 것도 있긴 한데, 제 입장에서는 저 같은 성격의 특히 남자 아이들은 이렇게 이래라 저래라 간섭하는 걸 싫어하고 내가 혼자 결정하고 잘 되든 잘못되든 내가 책임지는 걸 좋아하는데, 어머님들은 또 이제 여자분들이 조금 더 패시브한 게 있으니까 좀 부모님들이 결정해 주는 걸 좋아하고, 그래서 성별 차이도 있고 부모 차이가 있을 때 아이들에게 선택권을 좀 더 제너럴스하게 줘도 되는 건지, 아니면 뭐 이렇게 하이스쿨 아니면 어덜트가 될 때까지 선택도 부모가 많이 해줘야 되는 건지, 그게 고민이 될 때가 많이 있거든요.
Just for so the question is how to navigate granting independence in an age-appropriate way, and I would say you have to figure it out. Each family, yes, but the principle is yes. So I tell my kids as they were growing up, you have my trust until you lose it. Yeah? So some parents는 반대예요. 아이들 무조건 의심하는 부모님들이 있어요. There are some parents who kind of out of fear and protection, I think they don't trust their kids until they earn it. But because hopefully I raise them well and I instill good values in them, I tell them you have my trust until you lose it. You demonstrate to me that you are not worthy of my, like lying, catching them in a lie or things.
Same idea. Yeah, so, like, sometimes then they'll know that it's a gift that you're giving them the trust, and they will value it, because whenever they betray that trust, they know that they have failed something that you have given them.
저희들 학생들 가르칠 때도 마찬가지죠. I use the same principle in my classes, and I teach undergraduates all the way to doctoral students. And every single class, I tell them at the beginning, you have my trust until you don't. When do they lose their trust? They're flaky. They make first excuse, 아프다 그러면 I believe them. But then they're not really engaging in class. They're doing that, and then slowly they erode my trust that they are dedicated, good students. But these are always the students who challenge the grade the most. I just had an email from a student before I came saying, how come I didn't get this 1 point? And she was saying, I was there every time, and this, and she wasn't. But yes, so the idea is, so I think you'll figure it out. I think the idea is age appropriate, 나이 맞게. And how you decide that is you have to be in agreement. That definitely. Even if you disagree, 부모님들이 절대 아이들 앞에서 disagree 하지 마세요. If you have disagreements, figure it out in the back, but not in front of the children. But that's the idea, age appropriate. Yeah, it's kind of hard to say, but I would say trust yourselves. Yes, and I know that you will. I think there was some. I had some other thought related. Yes, that's exactly what I was going to do. Yes, everyone, so we're going to take a quick 5-minute break, all right? So if you need to stretch, go to the bathroom, drink water, and then we'll come back and we'll do the second module, which will be very cultural identity. Yes. I have 3 bottles of water. 푸시만 하면 되는 거야? 네네. 아무거나 다
당신 아주 굉장히 저강 같지? 그래서 얼마나 경쟁인 줄 알아. 그런 아이들이 목사 자녀들이 얼마나 많았어요. 그래서 지금은 아주 행복한 역할을 하고 엄마의 기름이 엎드려지시더라고요. 나는 미국 음식을 안 먹었어요. 할아버지 결혼하다가 집에서 꼭 한국 음식 그렇게 수지요.
What is your cultural background?
so where did we fall?
That's
And
what
so-
I'm gonna talk about.
And so we were like, I could identify better with somebody who was Korean American or Iranian American than with my culture, because we understand the struggles our parents are just pushing, get that grade, and we're paying for schooling, we're paying for this, just get the grade. Like there's other things in the you can't see, and then everybody wants to be cool with us. Everybody.
So that's part of the burden for Asian Americans, is that whole model minority. It seems complementary, but it's actually very harmful, because it's only actually a small group that stereotype, but then it's assumed that every single Asian. So an example would be an Asian kid who's not better now, and the teacher says to me, "Why are you struggling? You're Asian, you're supposed to be good now."
Right.
The kid's like, "I'm terrible at it." But he feels doubly worse because he's going against a positive stereotype. So, yeah, those are kind of with this immigrant narrative. So I didn't mean to portray just a singular one, because there's many narratives. Yeah.
A certain standard of living. And it was good, like you said, we get serious entrepreneurs. Hard work. Come on, you gotta do this, you gotta do that. I gotta live to my expectations. So, took me a while. And like, make it hard on myself, more or less, because I have a certain expectation. Not so much, and I think for me, it was not so much relying on God, but relying on myself. And that's where the issue lies. I was trying to create my own dream, and it's like, I will do this, I will, look at God's show me. Now, it doesn't work that way.
He humbled Nebuchadnezzar.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I learned real quick. I was like, no. No matter how hard you work, you're not going nowhere.
Yes. Yes. 네, 이제 빨리 들어오세요. Everyone, please come back. I have to give you your tuition money, your free tuition benefit. That's right, you'll get a certificate of immigrant family overview. Before we go on to the next segment, I wanted to also give a chance for the Korean first generation to also reflect a little bit. And I'm going to ask Yoon Jip-sani here because she looked like a model student sitting in front. You know, the A student who's very attentive and had all sorts of insights. And so I asked her, and she had some really wonderful insights. So I'm going to have her share mostly in Korean, but it's kind of relevant to the first generation. So I'm not going to translate it just because of time. I'll give you a summary.
창피해서 할 얘기는 아닌데 선생님한테만 조용히 얘기를 했더니 말씀을 해달라고 해주셔서 하여간 선생님 고맙습니다. 이렇게 좋은 시간 오셔서 강의를 해주셔서 먼저
이렇게.
이 모든 교육과 이 모든 시츄에이션이 기본이 뭐냐 하면은 부부의 사랑이에요. Physically, spiritually, love. 부부의 사랑만 꼭꼭 바인드 되었으면 애들이 벌써 3 years old부터 엄마 아빠를 다 알더라고요. 제가 지금 거의 80 years old 되는데 그래서 엄마 아빠가 바른 사람이면 벌써 애들이 아무리 나쁜 데 갖다 놔도 물 못 들어요. 걔들도 엄마 아빠 닮아서 바른 데로 가요. 근데 엄마 아빠가 그냥 시지부시 그런 생활을 했으면 얘들 티네저부터 대학까지 막 스트러글. 그러다가 엄마의 기도가 스트롱하고 엄마가 하나님께 매여 있으니까 하나님이 붙들어 주시더라고요. 그리고 저는 어떻게 기도를 했냐면은 아이들이 다른 민족하고 결혼을 할까봐 절대 다른 나라 음식을 쿡 안 했어요. 한국 음식만 했어요. 그렇도록. 그러니까 우리 엄마는
안 해야겠어요.
우리 엄마는 스트레이트한 사람이야. 그렇게만 인정을 했는데 결국은 그 기도를 들어주시더라고요. 늦게 가서 결혼해도 한국 사람끼리 결혼해 주시더라고요. 근데 지금 와서 내가 애들 대학 갈 때 대학을 떠내보냈는데 아 내가 나쁜 엄마였구나. 소리 지르고 바른 길로 안 갈까 봐 그냥 막 막고 이게 아니었는데 내가 가만히 있고 기도하면 하나님의 홀리 스피릿이 걔들을 잘 가르쳤을 텐데 나를 아니까 내가 내 앞질러서 하나님을 앞질러서 가니까 이게 안 됐구나. 내가 틀린 거라고. 그래서 대학 때 갈 때 집 떠난 후부터는 엄마가 잘못했어. 엄마가 잘못했어. 그랬는데 그동안에 지들 귀에 안 들어온 거예요. 근데 요번 머더스 데이 때 딸한테 또 이메일을 보냈어요. 엄마가 잘못했어. 날 용서해줘. 엄마가 너희들한테 소리 지르는 거 잘못했어. 그리고 회개 메시지를 보냈더니 얘가 카드를 보냈는데 난 카드만 왔는 줄 알았어요. 너무 감격을 했는지 카드 속에 어떻게 다시 한번 보니까 돈이 들었더라고요. 그래서 돈을 받았어요.
결론은 그게 제일 행복했다는 거. Let me translate a little bit. So she was basically saying that, she realized as her kids went off to college that she wasn't really a very good mom, and that she was the kind of the harsh, nagging a lot, and that had she trusted God, then she, but she got in front of God is what she said, and was trying to, on her own will to try to, kind of keep her children in line, and in doing so, did things that was kind of hurtful to them. And so since then, she's been apologizing and apologizing. So I want to give you hope, again, for those of you who are still waiting for the parental authority, or just understanding that parents can grow too, even if it takes time. And so this Mother's Day, she also sent him an email apologizing for the ways in which she wasn't a good mother. And she got a lovely Mother's Day card. Not only the card, but it had money in it. So moral of the story, give your parents money. Okay, so we're going to go on to the next part. This part is really more for the younger generation, the 1.5, the children of immigrants, for us to understand our own struggles of growing up as minorities, cultural and racial minorities in America. Because that itself is a traumatic experience. So 부모님들은 저가 이거 겪은 거를 연구해가지고 publish해가지고 이것 때문에 유명하게 됐어요. 저 분야 안에서. 왜냐면 저가 이민 일찍이 왔기 때문에 저가 겪고 이거를 봤어요. 그래서 심리학 안에서 이런 것들을 연구해가지고 발표해가지고 제가 유명한 대학에서 연구하면서 가르치게 됐는데 부모님들은 잘 모르실 건데 혹시 옆에서 하여튼 참고하시고. So I'm basically saying this next section is really more for us under the children of immigrants, but that the parents might help to just kind of know what that experience is like. First of all, so 이거는 조금 더 영어로 하겠습니다. 네. When you think about Asian culture or whatever culture you are from, think about when you come to the U.S., 참 big cultural difference, right? Think about what are some of the most powerful cultural differences you experienced when you first arrived. 제일 그러니까 큰 문화 차이점에 대해서 몇 가지만 이렇게 어떻게 겪었었어요? What did you experience? That's some of the biggest cultural difference shocks. 아, that is so true. 집안에서 신발 신는 거. 죄 짓는 것 같았어. It's like sinning, isn't it? Yes, it's at that level, wearing shoes inside the house. Yes. What else? Yeah.
For me, it was the opposite.
Yeah.
Having to take my shoes off.
Of course. Yes. Such a weird thing, right? So self-conscious. Yes, of course. Very good. Yes. Oh my goodness. Yes. So true. 친구 부모님들이 자기 이름으로 부르는 거. Do you know that was so ingrained in me that even in graduate school, my professor, not that much older, she said, called me Don. I could not call him by his first name. Yeah, it's just ingrained. But now that I'm a professor, I don't let them call me by Ruth. Are you kidding me? No. I said, culturally, no, we don't call, by there. So they always call me Professor Chong. I insist on that. But if you think, yes, go ahead. Ah, yes. Yeah. So oftentimes in Korean culture, they do not let, especially daughters, sleep outside of their homes. That's so many non-white cultures. And so that became a real issue, it is for a lot of, when they have slumber parties and sleepovers, that's such a part of American young, right? Yeah. So here's the thing, any culture, 문화 다른 문화가 이렇게 contact 되면 there's going to be a conflict. Yes.
아들이
네.
아버지가 장
네. 네.
엄마를 수제하냐고
네.
그래서 지금 알아보니까
네.
이모가 같이 살았대.
아.
이모가 장 수제 부르니까 걔도 아빠를 정한이라고 부르고 엄마를 수제를 부르는데 대학 갈 나이인데
네.
대학 가는 나이인데 또 그렇게 부르고.
네. So he's given a particular example of how this family, how that came to be. But here's the thing. So especially the Asian culture, East Asian culture, and Western culture are in some ways very opposite. So for example, in America, it's a Western society is very individualistic. That's one of the core differences. 개인주의예요. But in East Asian cultures, 우리는 단체, collectivistic culture, right? So everywhere I go, it's not, well, especially when I was younger, it was like, who's your father? Because within the Korean community, my identity is defined by my parents, right? Now, as it's flipped, my parents' identity, like 자녀들이 잘 돼야지 부모님들도 이렇게 이제 나이가 들면 이렇게 flip하는데, so that's one. But if you think about it, Christianity played a very critical role in Western culture, having an individualistic orientation. Do you see the connection? Because Christianity at its core is individual. You know the saying, God does not have any grandchildren. He only has sons and daughters. So it's a very flat, horizontal relationship, right? But even in Greek philosophy and culture, the vote, democracy is very individualistic. But in East Asian culture, family, not the individual, is the basic unit of society. And the individual, 개인은 가족을 위해서 희생을 해야 돼요. The individual is expected to sacrifice for the best good of the family, right? That's part of the reason why, as immigrant parents, when their children get older, the parents feel like I have a right to tell you what kind of career. It's a direct reflection on me and the family. And the parents feel like I have a right, a culturally given right, to say I need to have some influence of who you're going to marry. Because in American culture, it's an individual happiness. In a collectivistic culture, marriage is not between two individuals. That individual is marrying into the kinship, and that person has to fit in well. So that's one difference. The other is in American society, so another saying, in US we have the squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? Assert yourself, be individual, right? If you don't, you're going to get overlooked. So that's a very, very essential American mentality. Squeaky wheel gets the grease. Do you know, I don't know if it's Korean 속담인지 모르겠지만 there is another saying in Asian culture. The nail that stands up gets hammered down. Isn't that? It is Korean? I saw this when, after I graduated from PUC, I went to Korea as a student missionary, and I looked among the student culture. How if anyone stood out a little bit, the group made sure that he conformed so that no individual stands out too much. It's a very collective effort to say, who do you think you are? You think you're better than us? We will put you in their place. That's why social bullying is such a big issue within Korean society. Right? The other thing that's very deep within Asian culture is maintaining harmony, not being disruptive. Right? So you don't want to stand out, you don't want to disrupt society. And so that's so all the relationships are very rule bound. So I don't know if you know, but in Korean culture, we rarely call people by their first name. We call people by their position. In church, it's always 집사님, elder, pastor. Even women, it's so-and-so's mom. Isn't that interesting? 누구 어머니, right? And then even in family relations, every single relationship has a title and a name. And if you think about why so many rules, is that knowing your place in the system maintains the harmony and balance. Right? But here's the other thing. Look at these two paintings. Given what we just said, 우리가 지금 말하는 것을 이 제일 대표적인 문화의 페인팅을 보시면 어떻게 거기서 나타나는지 알겠습니까? Can you see how these core values are reflected in these two very typical? So Mona Lisa, who doesn't know Mona Lisa, right? But what's the big deal about Mona Lisa? So she has this mysterious smile, okay? But here's the thing, in Asia, but look at, if you really 분석을 하면, here is this gigantic person. Look at the background is very, very distant. So the individual is very prominent. Not only the individual, but this is a known, we don't even know who she is. That's part of the reason why the painting is so alluring. Do you know that in Asian cultures, this painting would never have been done? Nobody would paint a nobody and give that person such prominence. Because 아시죠? 동양 문화에서는 페인팅, 사람을 페인팅하면 누구예요? 천한 사람요?
그 시대에는 페인팅,
네.
시닝, 천한 사람.
Oh, I meant the focus 하는 거. 네, but 왕들, only very important people got individual portraits. Nobody that no one knows who this would not, no matter how beautiful or the mysterious smile. So you see how Mona Lisa really exhibits Western culture, right? On the other hand, if you look at the right side, my right side, it's example of a very typical scenery. The scale is very big. You have all nature, and you see human beings, but what is the size of the human being? Very tiny. And the human being exists within the whole. Exactly. Everything living in 조화, harmony and balance. And that's the way that the world is supposed to be ordered. All right, so setting that up, the question is, then how does someone, now we're not talking about adults, but kids, growing up and immigrating here, and they are very quickly introduced to American culture through school, through media, through friends. Their home life is still very Korean or immigrant, whatever that culture is. School life is very different, different messages. You go back and forth and back and forth. And then as you get older, 조금 더 나이 들수록 이게 자꾸만 the pull gets worse. Even worse, if we look at the parents' generation, 부모님들 시대를 보면, the culture that they focus on and try to preserve. What version of Korean culture is that? or any parents. Because now, because they immigrated, preserving the culture becomes even more important. Holding on to that culture preserves the family relationships that they're 편하고 원하는 걸 유지하고 싶잖아요, right? So we're trying to preserve culture, but here's the question: what version of Korean culture are these immigrant parents trying to preserve? Traditional, from Korea. They get frozen. Their understanding of Korean culture, whatever, is whenever they came. Now it's a little different. We have so much Korean television, but our immigrant parents, they were lucky if they had Korean newspaper. 안 그래요? 옛날에는 한국 신문만 받을 수 있어도 big deal. Very little TV, before videos and all of that. So this becomes even bigger because the Korean culture that the immigrant parents are trying to preserve is an outdated Korean culture change 했는데 부모님은 아직도 70년도, 80s and 70s version of Korean culture. That not only is that stuck, but they're trying to hold on to more desperately. And then the kids are over here trying to get away from that as much as possible. So this is a big, big issue in 부모-자녀 conflict. 오늘 그거는 시간이 없는데, but how do the kids, 이런 진짜 힘든 situation에 이 아이들이, how do the kids resolve it? So there are 3 models. Whether we know it or not, we have certain ways of, and I'm talking about us as the younger generation, like how do we make sense of this conflicting value system? All right, so this is coming straight from my research. Okay, model 1 is called bipolar only because 우리 이렇게 그러면 이것을 한국 문화, 미국 문화를 어떻게 화해를 하는가? How do we, find balance or, so this is bipolar. What we see is here is the culture of origin, wherever that is. Okay? And then here's American society. So how am I trying to combine it? I'm going to be right in the middle. Do you remember in the old playgrounds they had seesaw? You go like that? And always as a kid, you do this once, right? You try to stand there and you try to find balance so that it lays it. That's exactly what some immigrant kids growing up, that's their idea of how do I deal with this conflict. Trying to find that very tenuous balance. Right? So because what happens if you go this way, you tilt, right? If you go this way, you tilt. So I'll give you an example. This was me at PUC when I went off to college. Okay? So 여러분 저는 70년도에 이민 왔으니까 상당히 일찍이 왔어요. I immigrated very early. So and my father being a minister, I saw all the Korean immigration from the inside out. Right? And then I went through it myself, but I'm always on the forefront of kind of Korean immigrant kids and trying to figure this out. So what happened was I went to PUC, and I went to Korean church. On the weekend, it was all Korean. During the school week, I went to Orangewood Academy in Southern California. And if you saw me at, 그건 다른 이야기고, but anyway, I got to PUC, and so I had 2 groups of friends, my Korean club, and then my white girlfriends in the dormitory. Okay? What happened was, I would try to do this, spend equal time with my white girlfriends, and then my Korean club. But 한국 학생들하고 이렇게 시간 보내면 what they would say, 너는 왜 저 백인 여자들하고 hang out 하니? They would say, what's with you hanging out with those white chicks? Back then we were called chicks. But then when I would be with my white chick girlfriends in the dorm, they would say, what are you doing hanging out with those fobby Koreans? Fobby Koreans, right? So it was very difficult my freshman year because it's the first time I'm trying to figure this out, and I'm just kind of in the middle trying to find balance. So that's the zone of acculturative stress. It's very stressful because I want to maintain a balance, but it's difficult to maintain this balance. Okay? Another model is you have, on one hand, some folks who say, I'm just Korean. So what's interesting, many of you may know my brother Billy Chong, he's at Chattanooga, right? And he's very supportive of the 테네시 컬리지델 처치에 오랫동안 거기 자리 잡는 빌리 청을 여러분 주로 아실 건데 저랑 he and I, my brother and I are only 18 months apart. So we kind of grew up like twins. All right? And so from high school 똑같은 학년이었어요. Yeah? But what I saw was when we were in high school, 학교 갔을 때는 우리는 very different people. My brother was very traditionalist. He would only hang out with the Koreans. And then, he liked Korean, mostly Korean things. But me, when I was at school, if you didn't see my 얼굴만 못 봤으면 나는 완전히 백인 학생이라고 볼 수 있었어. You could almost think if you didn't see my face, I could pass for being just your average white high school student because I was so invested in trying to be white. 나는 동양이 된다는 게 너무나 창피했어요. 왜냐면 소속 민족이고. 근데 국민학교 1학년, even in my very first, I remember first grade at La Sierra Elementary School, I still remember sitting behind one of my classmates who had blonde hair. And I remember looking at her hair from behind and thinking, why wasn't I born blonde? Why do I have to look so different? Because back then, no one knew what Korea was. And, friendly church friends would say, what are you? Like I was from some alien. This was 로마린드 라시에르가 옛날에는 그렇게도 동양 사람이 없었어요, right? So, you have those experiences of being so different, so singled out. It starts to affect your identity, whether people are mean or intended or not, right? And so I kind of grew up in that environment, but I had very split. Weekend, very Korean. At school, very white, So you have this same family, but you had very different ways. So my brother kind of chose the traditional route, and I chose kind of I want to try to fit in and be as white as possible kind of route. And then we kind of came together at PUC. My brother kind of learned to be more Americanized, and then I kind of eventually figured out. But 여기 위에 있는 bicultural Asian American 하고 여기 중간에, I'm going to turn you into a class now, and I'll address this. What's the essential difference? It's both visual, so look at the visual depiction of the model because it matters. The B that is supposed to be in the middle versus this B, the bicultural Asian American, in this transcultural model. What's the difference between this version of trying to achieve bicultural? Because each of these models is talking about how does one try to be both, right? What's the difference?
What I think is the bipolar one is that you try to be on each side, but you want to be in the traditional side, you're following their rules, and on the American side, you're following their rules. But the other one, bicultural, you're trying to mix those and making your, mixing culture. That's what I see.
Okay. Anyone else want to add, elaborate?
On the transcultural, try to find balance. And actually try to don't be too here, too over here. Just try to create your own what you think is the best. And the other one, you're always wanting one to be.
Yeah, it's more about position, right, versus integration. Absolutely. Anyone else?
With the bicultural, I think you take the best of the traditionalists and nationalists and come up with that.
That's exactly it. So it isn't just about being in the middle, but that's why it's a two-dimensional model.
Yeah.
That's why it's two-dimensional. It's transcultural. Yes. So that's exactly it. What this person is trying to do, is to say there's a lot about Korean culture that is good and bad. There's a lot about American culture that is good and bad. Whereas these two people down here, they kind of rejected one for the other. Do you see? They kind of 하나는 포기하고 하나만 잡은 거예요. 밑에 있는 사람들은. 그런데 여기 있는 사람은 두 개 다 장점, 약점을 다 이해를 하고 거기에서 they pick. And it's a very individual process because it's not the same for everyone. But after you critically analyze both cultures, then you take what you think is best from both and then try to create a new, integrate what's called the third culture. It's a third cultural space that transcends the extremes and the rejection of the one or the other. Right? So that's the different version of it. Any questions or thoughts on this before I show you the third one? So this sounds good in theory, but in reality, it's hard to do, right? It's hard to be the same, consistent, integrated person in all situations. So in theory, it sounds good, but in reality, it's a lot more different. So how does this model differ? Remember, again, we're focused on the bicultural version. How does this model differ? Okay.
They're continuously changing.
There is some indication of that, yes?
I think the fourth kind of culture, environmental.
Aha, there is a new fourth category we haven't seen before, and we'll come back to that. Okay? But right now, if we just focus on the bicultural, how is this person different from this person and the one in the middle? And here's the key, because this is conceptually and theoretically, you're getting the cutting edge theory and development in cultural identity, conceptualization, and measurement. It's very getting technical. But what do we do here? What is this dimension?
They're moving up and forward.
So this, what we did was, this is the culture of origin, the original culture. You can be high or low. Okay? And then 이쪽은 뭐예요? American culture. You can be high or low. Do you see what we've done here? What do? We took this model and did what? And what that means is, why does it have to be either or? That's a simple idea, but it's a huge paradigm shift. Do you see that? Because in this model, we assume the more you go over here, you're farther from there. That's what's called a linear either-or zero-sum game. But what you've done here is to say why. 조금 좀 테크니컬한데 여러분 이해하시겠지 모르겠지만 이 모델은 한국 문화, 미국 문화를 반쪽이라서 이쪽 가면 이쪽이 손해 가고 그렇게 생각하는데 이 모델은 아니 따로 다른 디멘션이다. 한국 문화는 한국 문화 따로 생각하고 미국 문화는 미국 문화 따로. 꼭 여기 간다고 해서 여기가 낫는 게 아니에요. So this is with the most recent conceptualized, we call it multidimensional, and we think of each dimension separately. So now we can think about how Korean am I? How Mexican am I? How Colombian am I? How Filipino am I? I can be high or low on just Koreanness. And then 이쪽으로 보면 how Americanized I am I? I can be very Americanized or I can be low. So now we're thinking of it as independent dimensions. 그러면 이쪽 bicultural 사람은 어떤 사람이에요? Literally interpret the graphic. Someone who is 여기 있는 사람은 어떤 사람이에요? Highly Americanized and highly Koreanized. And both, not one or the other. Maybe it's a very simple but a profound difference in the way that we think about cultural identity and cultural adaptation. Is that the ideal is not even just an integration, 좋지요? But it's hard to achieve. 어떻게, how do you reconcile and integrate individualism with collectivism? Some of these values are just inherently contradictory. You kind of have to choose one or the other. This one says no. In some ideas, when I come to Korean church, I'm very Korean, or mostly Korean. when I go to my work context, I am as assertive as I need to be be successful in a very male-dominated American environment. I am both Korean and I'm trying to be very Americanized as well. Yes.
My experience, first, 자녀들한테 가르치기를 먼저 한국 사람으로서의 자부심을 주었어요. 우리는 절대. 그러니까는 얘들이 부끄러운 걸 모르더라고요. 그리고 나 자신도 학교에 가면 절대 한국 사람으로서의 부모, 나 굉장히 영어 못했어요. 뭐 알아듣지도 못하고 말도 못하지만 내 태도를 보면 절대 딱 니들한테 안 진다 하는 태도를 내 자녀들한테 보이고 나 자신도 그렇게 했어요. 했더니 얘들이 그래서 그러는지 모르지만 하여가 잘 이렇게 해서 이쪽도 저쪽도 잘 하더라고요. 그리고 문제가 없이 근데 뒤에서 뭐 문제 일어난 걸 엄마 몰래 했겠죠. 그렇게 해서 그다음에 우리 하나님 백성도 그래요. 나 하나님에 대한 자부심을 완전히 가져야만이 세상에 나가서 접촉할 때 무리 안 들지. 자녀들도 똑같아요. 그렇게 해서 저는 살아왔습니다.
I think she's basically saying she really taught her children to be very proud of their culture of origin. And I think most parents do, my dad included. But what I would challenge and kind of push back a little is one thing for inside. My dad was the reason why I can speak Korean as well as I can is because my father said, when you're home, speak Korean. So I appreciated that. 그렇지만요, 집에 안에서 하는 거하고 바깥 사회에서 you can't underestimate the power of being a minority and how you feel so just by thinking different, how that affects one's identity. So yes, I'm glad that I had that kind of cultural buffer, but the external environment makes a huge difference. It really does. Right? And that's where these conflicts and sense of self-esteem and all those issues come in, because to be a minority in this society is not something. Just now, Korean culture is really popular. It hasn't. This is a very new phenomenon, which even shocks me today. Yeah. 네.
저는요, 미국 와서 애기들이 나서 클 때. 제 생각은 한국 문화를 모르는 아이들한테 한국 문화를 강요할 게 아니라 얘들은 애들부터 후손들이 미국에 살게 될 테니까 우리가 빨리 미국 문화에 동화해야 된다. 그런 생각을 했거든요. 근데 물론 생활하는 데는 한국 사람으로서의 몸에 배겨 있으니까 했겠지만 애들이 어떻게 밸런스를 맞췄는지 지금 이제 성인이 40대 50이 가까이 되니까 그걸 보고 지금 이제 이해하려고 하는 게 어떻게 내 사고방식이 애들한테 영향을 미쳤을까 하고서 이제 관찰을 하는 단계죠. 근데 뭐 그런 단계예요.
네.
어떻게 애들이 영향을 받는데 어떤 타입에 속하는지 모르는데 우리가 미국 문화에 빨리 동화해야 돼요. 한국 문화에 대해서는 얘기 안 했어요. 모르는 걸, 모르게 될 걸, 가서 살지 않은 날 모르게 될 걸 강요해서 애들한테 부담만 주고 여러 가지 올라만 두고 하여튼 빨리 우리가 동화돼야 된다. 그런 생각을 하고 컸고 애들을 키웠고
네. 네. 그런데 솔직히 말해서요, and I'm going to speak to this. 이 분야에 대해서는 여러 부모님들의 역할이 별로 할 수가 없는 게 여러분이 상상하는 거, 우리 자녀들의 세계가 너무 틀려서 this is one area where we, as my generation, we had to figure this out on our own. 저는 I had a really nice, good relationship with both my parents, but it never even occurred to me to talk about these kinds of issues with my parents because I couldn't even figure it out. It's only after the fact that myself and other people have articulated these models again to try to understand our experience and make sense of that by articulating these models to think about, oh, I think I was operating under one set of assumptions, and then I moved into another one, and now I'm encouraging us to think about it in different ways, because these models, even though they reflect reality, they also shape reality, right? And give us new ways of thinking about this. And one of the benefits of this is that we can see any culture as an asset. So rather than being judgmental of the traditionalist and the assimilated, now what we can say is, you know what? Being connected to one culture, even if you reject the other, is still better than no culture, right? And yeah, you don't want to give up, all of your culture of origin to be American, but even there, what anthropologists and scholars are seeing is if you're trying to commit to and invest in any culture, that cultural values play a kind of a protective role, right? But the ideal is, why do you have to be and/or? Why can't you try to learn Korean culture as much as possible? Almost reverse acculturation, assimilation, right? Now it's popular, but even when it wasn't, right? And then trying to be American, and when it is appropriate, exhibit those behaviors, right? But I do want to go back to the fourth person. What we're seeing in research, 제일 위험한 학생들이 누군지 알아요? 젊은 teenagers and young adults are the ones in the marginal category. Why? How would you describe them? These are youth and young adults that are not connected to either American culture or their culture of origin. It makes them very vulnerable. Vulnerable to what? And because they need a sense of belonging, where are they going to find that sense of belonging, if not in one culture or the other? Third party. What are most common examples of third party where they give you a strong identity? Gangs. Gang. 깡패들 이렇게. Very strong identity. 아니면 drug use. That becomes their community. And so what we see across all minority populations, when we look at kids that are in trouble and we measure their identity, guess why? A high percentage of them fall into this marginal category. They feel rejected by and rejecting of both cultures. They create their own third culture, and it's based on a negative identity. Two hands. Yes.
How would that apply to biracial?
Biracial is a very different phenomenon. I mean, it's related but slightly different. So for the sake of time, we can have an off conversation around that. Yeah. Because race is so much about appearance. So let me just say that Tiger Woods, he's more Asian than he's black, but Tiger Woods has always been talked about as black. Why? Because he looks that way. So when it comes to biracial, it's less about culture, but it's how you look that people project onto them. They give them an identity. Does that make sense? So it's a little bit different than culture, where I should say, in my, there was one time in high school where I literally was trying to be so white, I thought I looked white, until I saw my reflection in the mirror, and this is very common. So, but at that point, I realized I can never be white, because I don't look white. And it took that mirror in my high school and seeing myself in the middle of my white girlfriends and how I stood out so much, that was the shock that made me realize, 이거 포기해야겠다고 하는 reality check가 그때 있었어요. 왜냐면 고등학교 때는 너무 백인 문화에 accept 되고 싶어서, 그 다음에 보는 사람들은 다 백인이니까 그 사회 안에서 나도 백인인 줄 알았어. 착각까지 해요. 그런데 학교에서 이렇게 mirror 이렇게 보니까 너무 샥 받은 거예요. I was like, I don't look white at all. 너무나 틀리게 보이니까 그때 그 shock 때문에 내가 왜 할 수 없는 것을 이렇게 노력해야 되나. 그래서 that's my journey into my bicultural identity is that moment. But a lot of Asian Americans have the same experience. 그 정도까지 이 사회에서 fit in 하고 accept 되기를 원하는 게 너무나 흔해요. And that's the reality I want to explain. And it's about environment. Sorry, I got on a tangent, but you see the difference, right, between race and culture? 근데 웃기는 게 저희 남편은 미국 2세예요. 그런데 한국 사람이에요. 그런데 나는 그때 오렌지 카운티, 그때 한국인들 there were very few Asians. So I'm talking about how powerful the environment plays a role. My husband and I are about same age, both Korean American. I'm 1.5. He's second generation. 근데 I grew up at high school in Orange County that at that time was very, even in a church environment, was very not white. So I felt that pressure, right? 근데 my husband grew up 45 minutes away. No Koreans, but it was diverse. Indians and Jewish and other kinds of ethnicities. He didn't have any of the same struggles I did. Even though he was still the one Korean. Why? Because his environment was diverse. And that broke that pressure and mold. When you're the only person that's different in an all-white dominant environment, 그때 그런 pressure,를 느껴요. Fit in, belong. 특별히 high school 때. High school 때 제일 이게 위험할 때, vulnerable 할 때예요. Because you want to be accepted, you want to be cool, you want to be integrated. But being Asian was not cool at the time. Yeah. But my husband, 45 minutes away, same generation, different environment, not Korean, but more diverse, didn't have those same kinds of struggles. 그만큼 환경이 중요하다는 것을 illustrate 하는 거예요. And then the salience of race versus culture is different. Right? Okay, I think I need to move on. So, I think any other particular insights around this? Do these models kind of help kind of make sense and track your own journey, your own progression?
Add to it.
Yes.
To the last part, just something small.
Yes, please.
I grew up around Hispanics and blacks, so I seen that sometimes our culture of growing up like that in a medium income society, like it pushes you to pick, because I grew up in apartments with predominantly blacks, and then I went to a school where it was a lot of riots and a lot of fights, and then you either had to choose one. Well, they're my friends from my apartments, but I'm Hispanic,
Yeah.
and so who I'm going to be,
Yeah.
who I'm going to choose.
Yeah.
And then in jail is the same thing, that you don't have a choice.
Yes.
So in jail, it's all about race.
Yeah.
Your culture
And
really
it's your survival.
is your survival.
Yeah.
And some kids are not given a choice in there.
Yeah.
Either you roll with us, or we're
Yeah.
gonna beat you up until you get
That's
out
right.
of jail.
Yeah.
So they growing around that, they have that mentality that they have to be a certain point, and that they can't be something else. They can't be divided, and they only have to stick with something. So when you're born Mexican American, you get divided into being American Mexican, like being born here, or you're gonna be a Mexican that was born in Mexico. So it's like you need to find a balance, like you were saying.
So I think that the crux of the main point that I'm hearing from is sometimes identity isn't a matter of choice. It's made for you by the environment. So again, context and environment is so important, right? And then there are also Asian Americans from really low income communities where they feel very alienated from this kind of, upwardly mobile model minority. They feel much more in common with African Americans and others growing up in more low income communities. So there are many different versions. Yes.
When you were talking about the marginalized group, we're talking about the marginalized group finding identity into gangs. Did you see any research that also showed any identity into like extreme political parties? Or it was mainly gang that showed like as the third identity?
Yeah, I think the extremism in American politics is more recent to this extent, not that there hasn't been. And it's, I think politics as an active sense of identity comes much later on in adulthood, whereas we're really talking about during adolescence. So I haven't yet seen that connection. Yeah, but where I see it evolving is a lot of these mass shooters are people you could see fall within that alienated category, right? Are they not? They're kind of loners, they're disconnected, they're angry at society, they don't feel very connected, and so they lash out. So I think the modern, like recent version of it is really kind of connected to people who are engaging, whether they're Asian or black or anti-minority. I think a lot of them kind of fall within that. But I haven't seen any research going that far yet. Yeah, and then we'll move on. Yeah, here.
So I grew up in Los Angeles, and the majority of my group was Hispanic. A lot of them were, well, not a lot of them, but a good percentage of them were into gangs. Almost got recruited once. So, I mean, we all have choices. And I had a friend, and I kind of spoke to him about it. He goes, man, we're not even from the same group, you know? You don't even relate to a lot of the stuff. I'm kind of glad that I spoke to him about it, because it was running in through my head. I was like, where do I belong? But I saw my parents' struggles, and I didn't want to take part of that either. So, but we do make choices, and sometimes, even when we don't fall in either group, or we're not to assimilate or be part of our heritage, I mean, we do have a choice. And I mean, early on in my childhood, my mom told me, it was like, whatever you do, you're on your own. So there's only so much I could do for you. So we do have a choice.
Okay.
Based on your experience and observation, as far as this multidimensional or cultural, diagram looks, what would be different for someone that is biracial versus,
Yeah, so going back to kind of what he was, so race is an identity-based, it's an outdated idea, but we still use it because it's such an important feature of American society, the way that the society is built, right? So 문화는 culture is substance inside, but race is just purely how you look. But in this society, how you look matters quite a bit, right? And people's view of you, your opportunities, and all of that. So again, with race, it gets a little bit more complicated and easier in the sense that with racial identity, it's almost imposed on you based on how you look. So if you are biracial and you have African-American white mixes who are very fair and they can pass, that's great, but then they're making racist jokes, right? What do they do with that? Do they speak up? They say, hey? Or do they just try to pass? So those are the kinds of struggles that I hear more about passing, not passing, how you present, how people view you, but inside, how are you really, and some discrepancy. The Asian version of this is when you look Asian, and you're fourth generation Japanese or Chinese, and then people say things like, where are you from? And for someone who's not an immigrant, they think, oh, I'm from Hawaii or I'm from whatever. And then the white person, based on how they look, says, no, where are you really from? And what does that say to that person? You're not an American. And this person is, I'm fourth generation American. But just because I don't look white, they're always seen as a perpetual foreigner. And those are the issues around, complexities around race. This gets into a lot of complex issues, but that's kind of the quick little. So a lot of it's an identity that is imposed on you based on how you phenotypically look, based on your racial heritage. Right? I'm going to go on just because I want to focus on this last part. Okay, this is a practical how-to skills. Okay, that cuts across. So it's a little different from just immigration or parenting, but it can help every single relationship. 여기에 제일 이제 간단하면서도 아주 중요한 테크닉이라고 할까요? 인간관계, in human relationships, if you just engage in these 4 simple steps, and you've probably heard it elsewhere too, it can really help whenever there's conflict. Right? So, because we are sinful human beings, when 2 human beings come together, there is going to be conflict, right? That is just inevitable, right? So how we deal with conflict, happy family, happy marriage, happy relationship is not defined by absence of conflict. 무슨 말인지 알아요? 꼭 뭐 행복한 결혼은 뭐 갈등이 없다. No. 오히려 that's problematic. Every relationship is going to have conflict, but healthy or not healthy relationship depends on how you deal with conflict. Right? So these are 4 very simple steps to help you deal with conflict. Because what happens in a fight? Think about the last fight you had. Whether it's marital or parent-child or co-worker, whatever it is. What's the last fight that you had? Or you observed? 한번 생각해 보세요. So what happens? One side, person A says, because you did something to me, like this, or I am angry because you did this to me. Okay? So person B, what does person B do? Defending, right? No, I didn't mean it. That's our best excuse. I want to say something about I didn't intend to. Okay? That's our best. I didn't mean to, I didn't intend to, or no. So this person defends themselves because they feel attacked, right? So then this person defends or even counterattacks. Then how does person A feel? It's like more angry because they express the hurt. Even if they're being very angry, what's really underneath it is hurt, right? And so the hurt has gotten bigger. And clearly, person B didn't hear what they said. So what does person A do? Wah, 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 wah. Louder, more emphatically, with more ammunition. And then person B feels even more attacked. So it's very simple, right? This is the escalation of human conflict.
갈등의 리설브는
네.
진실,
True.
그것만 표현하면
네.
다 리설브돼요. 다 언더스탠딩.
Well,
진실이 없는
네.
이 스킬은 더 컨플릭트.
근데 진실만 가지고 물론 truth is important or sincerity I think is what you mean. But we need to 테크닉이 조금 더 필요해요. 물론 그건 있는데 we need a little bit more technique in 진실을 어떻게 더 확실하게 서로 받고 인정을 할 수 있는가. And so here are some steps. Okay, first of all, whatever argument you have, whatever conflict, co-workers or anything, what is our first priority is to deliver. All right? So maybe we need to go whichever side on really prioritize listening. You know the joke, God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth, right? So if someone is, let's say that someone has expressed anger, frustration, or hurt to you, right? Recognizing, even though our natural response is to defend, right? Hold that response back and say, let me try to understand. Just focus on that. 이 사람이 왜 이렇게 upset하고 why are they hurt and responding in this way? Even though it's directed at me, put self aside for just a little bit. 아무리 조금 이렇게 해도 put self aside and then say, let me try to understand. And what that does is, instead of when you're fighting, you're facing each other. As soon as I say, let me try to understand, where does my position shift to? Next to them. Do you see that? We're arguing, but as soon as I say, let me try to understand, where am I going? Next to them. That's a very different position. Just that alone will get you very, very far. You try to hear. My phone has to sing. Right? But there's a couple of other more specific things. So try to listen more than defend, like really try to understand, right? Along with that, try to acknowledge the feeling. 그 밑에 있는 의미, 감정. Emotions are super, super important. So they're saying things, and they're saying things that may hurt you, that may make you go very defensive, but truly listen with the heart and say, what are they really trying to say? And oftentimes their message is what? You did this, and you did this, and but what's the real feeling behind what they're saying? I'm hurt. That's really what it is. I am hurt. Because you disappointed me or you did something, but really underneath it is, I'm hurt. So acknowledge the feeling underneath. And again, not only listening, but acknowledging that immediately, again, what is that going to do to this person? They're going to calm down.
Feel hurt.
Pardon?
Feel hurt.
Yes, and that's exactly what they want. They just want to feel heard, right? Many times when there's conflict, you're realistic. You know this person's not going to change overnight or there's some magic pill or anything. But 똑같은 문제 또 over and over. Sometimes, so you get tired. Even then, when I'm expressing hurt, I just want someone to recognize that. Even though I know realistically it may not change overnight, right? So acknowledging their feelings, that's a very important part, right? Identify the feelings. Say, I think, is it that you feel this way, or just name identify and label the feeling. Try that, not say you're feeling this way, but perhaps, is this how you're feeling? Is this the way that you've experienced me? Right? So I think I've already talked about be curious and seek to understand, right? So they all kind of go together. But here's the most important thing. Even when we try to hear, we rationally understand, but we can't, it's very hard for us to go outside of our own perspective. Because 우리 입장에서만 볼 수밖에 없잖아요. We're just naturally trained that way, right? But here's the thing, and this is probably the other takeaway, is that when I look at couples fighting or any kind of conflict, and this happened to me not too long ago. I was on a trip with one of my close friends. And then we were having a nice trip, and then halfway in the trip, they had some big fight. And each one of them came to me and told me their story. Because, I'm friends with them for a long time. And I know the history of the buttons and issues. And when I listened to his side, both of the facts were aligned. So if the facts don't align, that's really bad. But the facts, they were in agreement about what happened. But he was really hurt by something, and she was really hurt by something else. But what I saw them do is, as soon as this happened, both went phew. They went to their baggage, and they drug out all the other hurts, and they're just like this, hurt, and angry. And I realized at that point, if one of them would just come out of their own shell of hurt and offer this kind of, let me understand why you're so hurt by what I did. Right? Because what it is it's not either or. It's like the cultural paradigm. 이거나 저거나 이 사람이 맞나 저 사람이 맞나가 아니에요. In most human conflict relationships, I find that it is and both. She was right, and he was right. She had absolute reason to be hurt in that way, and he had a long history of hurt with that regard. And when this thing happened, all their baggage, right? But in that moment, and they know they're not going to change, those issues are always going to be there. But in that moment, what would have just dissipated, de-escalated that conflict is if just one of them, just takes one person to initiate, to say, let me try to understand how and why I have hurt you. Let me see things from your perspective. Doesn't mean you agree with everything, but just trying to make the effort shows I love you, I care for you, therefore I am going to try. 난 노력하겠다. 노력 자체가 희망을 주는 거예요. It's so important to give hope in relationships, because when people stop trying or they feel nothing's going to change and they don't care about me is when you lose hope in relationships. So we have to give each other hope. And one of the ways we do that is to demonstrate, I care for you, I'm going to listen to you. Even if I've heard this 100 times before, and we usually have, right? Because in many ways it's just needing to be heard, right? And getting a lot of those emotions out. So here's the other thing. This is the one thing for young adults. So Tay, I'm going to invite myself to come back and offer to do a seminar for the young adults, because this is so important. Relationship seminar. Okay? But I'm going to give you a little bit preview. Those of you who are not married, you know how, like happiness, we think about circumstances, what's out there, what to look for, if this and this and that. But I will say true happiness and finding the right person is focusing on yourself. The healthier you are as a person, the healthier person you're going to find and attract and marry.
Yeah, I've heard that you always try to look for the right person or the perfect person, but I think we are supposed to become that right person before trying to find that.
Yes, if you become the kind of person, then you will attract the kind of person that you want to be with. Right? But as much as we have a list of what to look for, there's a list you also need to have. And what are some things in a person, if you see them, you must avoid them. And if you have a choice, and it's voluntary, you need to run away. Because that human trait is truly toxic. I'm not saying those people are bad, because there's a reason why they've become that way, but this is one of them. Okay? And you'll see why in a minute it's so toxic to relationship. If you're in relationship with one of these people, you will know. And what that is when two people fight, some people are not willing or able. I'm not sure what's what. This is one of the biggest spiritual and professional mysteries. I'm still seeking insight from God. I'm not sure if it's because they can't or they won't, but they do not exhibit an ability to see things from the other person's side. So how does that manifest itself? You know one of those?
Are you talking about narcissists?
Yeah. Now you kind of know what that looks like in public a lot more, right? What are some examples? They are always right, and you are always wrong. Their way is the right way and the only way, and there's no other way. They literally cannot or refuse to see things from anyone else's perspective. We've all may have encountered some of them. And 미안하지만 한국 남자들 중에 이런 분들이 좀 많아요. Especially older generation, my father's generation, and I think a lot of it has to do with the Korean War. 한국 전쟁에서 혼자서 자라나면서 아주 어렵게 자라난 사람들이 특별히 이런 성격을 가지고 있어요. 아니면 외동 아들이든지 아니면 only son이든지. There's particular Korean versions I'm sharing. But this is what I've seen, and what it is they just won't admit. So whenever there's conflict resolution 할 수 있는 방법이 없어요. There's no mechanism by which you can work out any kind of a conflict because it's always one-sided. So this is where I come back and see if you're in, whether it's parents, whether it's a spouse, whether it's co-worker, when you're dealing with these folks, there's not a lot of hope. There's always hope, but the best thing to do is avoid them because they're so rigid. And so if you have a parent like that, one of the worst things you can do is spend all your time and energy trying to please them or appease them because they will never be appeased or pleased. So this comes back to your question. So I'm not exactly that version, but if you have parents or partners or people, how do you deal with them? Because being in contact will constantly be, there's no solution to that relationship. you have to respectfully create a boundary. Where you can still care for them, you can still show them respect, but as soon as they start to exhibit that behavior, you need to create the boundary and remove yourself from that because it's never their fault. And I think this is truly the essence of sin. It really is. It is the core essence of sin. Is that particular ability. It's never their fault. And they're like, why do people see me like that? They have no insights and awareness, even though they're constantly experiencing or told, right? So this is the one trait that I would look for in relationships if it's voluntary, if you see folks having this trait, to try to create healthy boundaries, certainly not getting involved in any kind of serious relationship with them. And if you're inevitably in a relationship, mitigate their impact. Do not let them rule you. Do not let them define you. Would be one of the things. So I know I spoke a lot into English, but 아주 principle은 간단해요. Could someone summarize the takeaways from how do you de-escalate conflict? Step number 1. Listen. Active listening, right? How do you demonstrate that you're listening? 그 사람이 말한 것을 너는 이렇게 느끼고 이렇게 말한다. Summary 하는 것 자체만 해도 it conveys to them, this person heard what I said. Whereas when we have an argument, we're not really listening. What are we really doing? We're getting our attack and defense ready, right? Yeah, but. Right? Whenever that, but really listen and convey to the other person that you're listening, right? What else? Seek understanding. Yeah. 아무리 아는 거, you may think, I've heard this 1,000 times. Even then, I wish my couple friend, if just one of them had said, let me understand why it is that this situation hurt you so much. If he could just put that self aside a little bit to just do that, the whole situation could have really de-escalated. Even though they're still going to be same people, they're still going to hurt each other, that situation really could have been de-escalated, right? What else? Acknowledge their hurt, yeah. Really tune into the feelings and emotions. And offer a genuine apology, and don't say, I didn't mean to. There's nothing more infuriating than I didn't mean to. We have to be responsible to a certain extent. Yes, we didn't mean to, that matters, because I didn't mean to hurt you, versus I'm trying to hurt you. It does matter, but in the end, it's how the other person experienced it. So we have to acknowledge their pain, and not use I didn't mean to as a defense or an excuse. Acknowledge their hurt. 그리고 사과할 때는 things that you need to apologize for, do. But other things, that's them. That's their issue too. You don't have to give everything away, right? So I'm not saying just be a doormat and admit to everything. No, they have their own distortions and things too. Just own up to what you really feel that you can, right? And finally, really try to take perspective, right? And I'll end with this example. I still remember when I was in graduate school and I was learning to be a therapist. I was working with this family. It was a single mom, a white mom with 2 young daughters. And the family came to therapy because one of the daughters had attempted suicide. Okay? And so I was doing family therapy with this family. And so the mom, one daughter, the other daughter, and then the mom is sitting there. And this daughter that had attempted suicide was basically trying to convey to the mom the hurt and the pain. Right? And then I'm thinking, wow, this is so much pain, right? And to the point, that she's attempted suicide. And I look over and the mom's like this. And I thought, this is why. Now, on one hand, right, if you're a mom, I understand and your child has attempted suicide, and that child is expressing that pain to you, I understand that you're going to feel judged and, right? Yeah, I understand that. but she's the mom. She's the adult. And here's a human being in pain. And for that moment, instead of focusing on who? Herself, trying to defend herself, if she just stepped outside of herself to see her child as a human being that is hurting, not attacking her, but as a human, because that's what I was saying. Look at this pain. Can you not connect at that level and just empathize? And I felt the exact same with my couple friends. Not that extreme, but they were both hurting. And I just thought, one person. So this is my last thought to you. What I am asking and suggesting isn't just psychological mumbo jumbo. This is a biblical and spiritual mandate. And let me give you an example. In the Garden of Eden, okay, when Adam and Eve took the apple and, sinned, who should have initiated reconciliation? Usually in this world, and humanly speaking, we thinking the person who did the wrong should initiate. But guess what? That is the nature of sin. That when we know that we did wrong, what do? We run, we hide. That is human nature, right? And so if you look at then, God had to come in search of us. He came calling through the Garden of Eden saying, Adam, Eve, where are you? To be a Christian is to be an initiator of reconciliation, because that's what God did through Jesus. That is a biblical mandate. So no matter who's right or wrong, we are called to initiate. We are called to be the bigger person. Even when we feel hurt in that situation, just for that moment, put ourselves aside and to be the initiator. Once you get it started, it rolls on its own. But that is a biblical mandate. And if throughout the Bible, if you look at it from this lens, it is an entire book of God in search of man. We always think ourselves searching after God and seeking after God and saying, where are you, where are you? But the entire Bible is really God in search of us and asking, where are you? I want to connect with you. I want to heal. I want to reconcile. I want to give you life and joy. And so in whatever human relationships you're feeling conflict, and we all have baggage, this is the challenge for you. The calling of God as children of God is to be initiators of reconciliation. Let us pray. Dear Heavenly Father, I thank you so much for your beautiful children who are gathered here, who are committed to the journey of being your children, committed to learning and growth. I thank you so much that I'm able to worship with them and impart just some wisdom and knowledge that you have given to me through life experiences and through my learning. I just ask for an extra measure of your Holy Spirit to be poured upon all of us, to grant us wisdom to navigate the difficult, challenging relationships, to know how to navigate being a Christian in this increasingly difficult and challenging world. I pray that you would fill our hearts with love and with grace so that we can be a conduit, a pipeline of your love and your mercy and grace to this starving world. Thank you so much, Father, for your love. In your name we pray. Amen. Thank you for spending all this time and for your attention.
고맙습니다. 여러분들도 고생하셨지만 앞에서 말씀하신 우리 루스정 박사님 굉장히 피곤한데 강행군 하셨습니다. 진심으로 감사드리고요. 마치면서 혹시 이 질문을 꼭 하고 싶다는 것 있으신가요? 아니면 예, 없으시죠? 가시면은 그냥 마치 안전히 돌아가시고요. 그다음에 영어권은 따로 뭐 미팅이겠죠? 예, 하시고 그다음에 뭐 개인적으로 상담하실 일이 있으시면 나중에 전화 주시면 시간이 될지 안 될지 모르지만 그렇게 하도록 하겠습니다. 예, 감사드리고 또 한 주일 동안 잘 지내시고 다음 주에 건강하게 뵙겠습니다. 고맙습니다.
저는 눈이 너무 안 좋아서 앞에 앉아요.
Would you do me a favor? We gotta go
Unplug it?
Yeah, unplug it, and we gotta take two